July 20th, 1969 was a revolutionary day in history. The first humans set foot on uncharted territory, initializing the beginning of an era. The era of exploration. Neil Armstrong, the figurehead of NASA exploration, stated, "Mystery creates wonder, and wonder is the basis of man's desire to understand." Which is why, before acknowledging the man on the moon or praising modern-day revolutionaries, it is crucial that we look to the scientist who created wonder, Nicholas Copernicus. The man who took a stand for science, for the right to understand. From involvement in science and astronomy that he is known for today, Copernicus was so much more. He not only inspired the future, but also took a stand against his time. He may not have had the intentions to spark a revolution, but nonetheless, he had a major impact on the world he hoped to change. The aforementioned revolutionary of the Renaissance was a man of skepticism. The pragmatic scientist, while a member of the Catholic Church, published a large piece on the heliocentric theory, or the theory that the Sun was at the center of the solar system, with Earth and other planets orbiting it. His work, De Revolutionibus Orbium Celestium Libri V, was revolutionary by today's standard, but incredibly controversial. The Church, as the main controller of education, was strict on the geocentric theorem, or the idea that the Earth took the Sun's place. With Copernicus suddenly stepping in to rebut the status quo using scientific evidence, rather than using pure religious beliefs, Copernicus took a stand against the religious views and the all-powerful Church, standing for the right to Church-exempt knowledge. Copernicus, taking a stand. In his findings, Copernicus went directly against the idea of geocentrism, which shaped not only the public perception at the time, but also shaped the Christian faith. The idea that the Earth was at the center of the universe came about from the ideology that God had created Zion, or Jerusalem, at the center of the universe. The heliocentrism concept was not only a revolutionary idea, but it undermined the religion itself. Copernicus ultimately proved the Bible wrong for one of the first times, bringing the idea that the Church can be wrong into light. One Church official was quoted in calling Copernicus a fool who went against the Holy Rite. In turn, this idea angered some of the population, mainly devout Catholics. But later, this idea contributed to the rebellious thinking of people such as Erasmus, Calvin, and Luther. Copernicus' small rebellion added to the anger, and that rebellion eventually led to the Reformation and the decline of the Church itself. This, in itself, was a large contribution to advancing society in the long term, and thus occurred during his life and just after his death. Nicolaus Copernicus, at the time of his life, had a minimal impact on the world, but after his death, the concept of heliocentrism was very impactful. Copernicus took a stand against the Catholic Church. He changed the Church's power on a political and a social level, mainly via the scientific revolution, which led way to an education system void of the presence of the Catholic Church. Theism warps the concept of scientific experimentation. When Copernicus took a stand for the truth of geocentrism and against the Catholic Church's word, he was actually also taking a stand for the right to Church-exempt research. As Copernicus stated in a letter to Pope Paul III of the Catholic Church, "I have accordingly no desire to, from your holiness, that I was impelled to consider a different system of deducing the motions of the universe's spheres for no other reason than the realization that astronomers do not agree among themselves in their investigations of the subject." He wanted astronomers to be clarified on the subject that the scriptures had actually muddled. He later stated in the same text, "Perhaps there will be babblers who claim to be judges of astronomy, although completely ignorant of the subject, and badly distorting some passage of scripture to their purpose, will dare to find fault with my undertaking and censure it. I disregard them, even to the extent of despising their criticism as unfounded." The Church, at the time, controlled education at the highest level, so any incorrect information that the Church insisted was fact. His main motive for pointing out the fallacies of the Church's name was to allow for citizens to participate in beneficial cooperation, which motivated lower-class citizens to work on the church's fallacies. Now, the Copernicus not only provided an idea, but also used analysis to back that idea. He gave people a choice to join his process, correcting church misused facts for the sake of furthering the field of science. Perhaps we can say that all of the bold things that Copernicus had ever done in his lifetime didn't really affect when he was alive. Rather, instead, it was what happened in the future that determined his own legacy. The combined impact of Kepler and Newton in the scientific realm are immense, but their impacts on religion are an idea often overlooked. During Copernicus' time, the Catholic Church was the most powerful force in the land, and religion influenced the status quo. Those who didn't follow it were often killed. Luckily, Copernicus led by example. During his time when he wrote his own documents, he had to face the trial of certain political forces, such as Alexander Osiander, who told him that he couldn't necessarily publish his piece unless he stated that his entire evidence was highly hypothetical, thus nullifying his entire case, breaking away from his own heliocentric foundation. This would have meant that Copernicus would have given up all of his life's work for the sake of falling into the realms of religion. Instead, however, Copernicus fought against Alexander Osiander, tried to resist his own influences, despite the fact that he was in the way of publication, and perhaps would have led to the excommunication by heresy. He did so anyways, and thus led to taking a stand against religious powers in general. Such of the influences led on to newer scientific revolutionaries, such as, for example, Galileo, Kepler, and Isaac Newton. Copernicus, in fact, apologized to the church for publishing his findings, hoping the church wouldn't punish him later. But, once again, he still fought against it nonetheless. Later on, Galileo was placed into this trend of Copernicus' lifetime. He was tried as a heretic for going against the Bible and accepting Copernicus' findings and building upon it. By the time Kepler and Newton came, the church had become more open to scientific works of these men. It started an era in which science and religion could coexist. But the only way this could have happened is because people pressed more and more of the skepticism towards religious powers, including the increase and stacking of scientific knowledge over the years. An example of which the results came after all these scientific influences was Sir Isaac Newton, who was knighted for his advancements in science, and for political reasons as well, instead of being threatened by the Catholic Church or another religious power. This change in views from the public and the church itself can be seen through the reception of Kepler and Newton's discoveries, and it couldn't have happened without Copernicus standing up against religion, pressing upon his skepticism, and later on, innovating new ideas in science, which led to the coexistence of science and religion. Nicolaus Copernicus was a man of great importance, not only for his actions, but for his impacts. Mostly throughout history, taking a stand was always seen as a violent act, something that was warlike in nature, and wasn't respected amongst men as an honorable action. But the way Copernicus took a stand is often overlooked in history, for being a rather passive one, only seen as a more scientific and intellectual revolution. But from doubting and disproving commonly accepted Aristotelian physics, Copernicus took a stand against the common idea that was put in place throughout society and education, and furthermore diminished the power of the most powerful force throughout Europe, the Catholic Church. And through his courage, he inspired future visionaries such as Galileo and Kepler to do the same, creating a domino effect that affected the future as we know it. Without Copernicus, history would have been hugely different, and we possibly wouldn't have put a man on the moon. Because Copernicus's concepts and changes was not only a scientific idea, but a spiritual one, as by standing up against the status quo, he created something much more than just an idea. He created wonder.